From the posters we see on the street or in the billboard along the busy buildings to hearing them on the radio, through television, and on social media platforms, advertising is literally everywhere. They even made their way into the most personal of our private moments, and needless to say, advertising has come a long way and is already at a certain level of invasion that is designed subliminally and overtly to infiltrate our mind's everyday process. One of the reasons why advertising has been successful is the use of semiotics. Semiotics, as we all know, is a scientific study of signs that refers to anything that can be used to stand for something else in order to deliver or generate a certain message. Just like what the famous line says, there's more than what meets the eye. Because an effective ad does not just display a mere product or service, but they embed certain belief systems, values, and culture in it, and they communicate that using colors, text, images, signs, and symbols. Besides the famous theories of Ferdinand de Saussure and Charles Sandor Peirce on their approaches in the science of semiotics, a French literary critic, cultural theorist, and semiologist, Roland Barthes, also played an important role. During the 1950s, he drew attention to the value of studying the messages and the techniques of advertisement using the theoretical tools of semiotics and from the semiotic concept of Saussure. After the publication of his book called Mythologies on 1957, he also looked on the semiology of the process on how advertising generates its meaning, animating and at the same time a society-wide debate on the broader ethical and cultural questions raised by entrenchment of advertising as a form of discourse in contemporary societies. Barthes on this matter is concerned with the constant change in advertising styles, techniques, and modes of delivery that tended to create a constant culture of wooing the public to crave for new goods. He called this neomania, a culturally induced state of mind which allows people to have an obsessive desire for new objects of consumption. In 1964, he officially published an essay called The Rhetoric of the Image, where he developed a way of reading a photograph, an advertising image, because he believed that it corresponds to a decisive mutation of informational economies, and Barthes tries to provide a symbolic message in this kind of image. He started his essay by coining the linguistic root of the word image, which has an ancient etymology linked to the word imitari, which signifies mimesis, and that the thing signified and the image signifying it are not arbitrary, but rather they are continuous, direct, and they make no recourse to a code. And despite the analogical nature of a photograph, several paradoxes are raised to criticize his concept. However, Barthes' desire to study photographic messages and how it conveys certain ideologies are heightened.
According to Roland Barthes, a photograph is a message without a code because it is grounded in analogical representations. In like language, which usually consists of a system of signs with only arbitrary connections to the objects that they represent. Photographs have a direct physical relationship with the objects they represent. A photograph does not require knowledge of an intermediary code the way that language does. He believed that photographs have a unique way to embody time and space. When we look at a photograph, we are confronted with what Barthes labeled as the having been there quality of its contents. Thus, for Barthes, he chooses a photograph to represent his ideas of all the kinds of images. Only the photograph is able to transmit the literal information without forming it by means of discontinuous signs and rules of information. He adopted a much more subjective perspective in an attempt to isolate what it is about a photograph that makes it able to affect us in such a strong, personal way. That's why in this particular essay, The Rhetoric of the Image, he explores how a photograph communicates its message. Aiming to have a clear pictures in result of this exploration, he particularly used an advertisement image to explain how photograph present a natural, innocent, and objective message. Barthes then goes on to explain the messages by breaking them down into three categories: linguistic, connoted, and denoted.
Roland Barthes, in introducing the three messages, started off by mentioning what contains the advertisement. Here, we have a Panzani advertisement. As you can see, there are some packets of pasta, a thin, a sachet, some tomatoes, onions, peppers, a mushroom, all emerging from a half-open string bag in yellows and greens on a red background. Focusing on this advertisement, he then attempted to skim off the messages therein, leading us to see what he has been trying to let us realize in terms of reading an image. In terms of linguistic message, the first message resides in the linguistic aspects. The linguistic message in the Panzani advertisement consists of the caption and the labels in French. It is everything expressed in language, whether it appears as a text, caption, or headline in the image or outside it, which tells us what we are looking at. Here, the linguistic message is twofold. According to Barthes, that signified has two levels of meaning, denotational and connotational. He noticed two types of linguistic messages at work: a denoted message which includes the caption and labels on the product, and a connoted message which includes the name Panzani, which connotes Italianicity. For instance, notice the text in the advertisement, specifically the printed words, which is the labels and caption. For the denotational linguistic message, the sauce denotes what one of the product is, and Panzani denotes the brand of the product. For the connotation linguistic message, Panzani, beyond the denoted message, it connotes the Italian dimensions of the food and general idea of Italianicity. Exclusively for French readers or those who have enough knowledge of French culture and language. Therefore, the linguistic message is denotative and connotative because it supplements the iconic message. The next message to be discussed, which is cultural and thus coded.
Coded iconic message or symbolic message. Roland Barthes further examined the other underlying messages that the image conveys, which now concerns the second message, with which is connected later to the third message. Setting aside the linguistic message, pure image is brought to one's notice, to which in this particular image shows discontinuous signs, thus form a coherent whole, for they are all discontinuous, require cultural background knowledge, and refer back to global signifiers imbued with values. Notice keenly the details that the Panzani ad contains. Barthes make reference to at least 4 signs that are identified from non-linguistic portion of the image along with their symbolic meanings. The half-open bag signifies return from market. Tomatoes and peppers signify Italianicity. The collection of objects signifies a total culinary service. The overall composition is a reminiscent of and therefore signifies the notion of a still life. These are now what Barthes referred to as the second message found in the ad. This is a coded iconic message or simply the symbolic message.
Non-coded iconic message or denoted image. The third message is conceived in its literal form. Therefore, the message here is from the identifiable or nameable real objects found in the image. The message, in this case, is seen without a code, which is completely the opposite of the second message to which it is imprinted on the literal image. The exhibited objects illustrate what they portray in reality when a spectator observes an advertisement. Non-coded iconic message or denote image purports the signifier and the signified as the same thing, making the image's reality as is, similar to the natural setting. To understand further, in contrast to the symbolic image described and explained in the coded iconic message, the iconic non-coded message explicates on the literal meaning of the advertisement. Judging by the elements displayed in the image, every time features its literal sense. The tomato denotes the actual fruit tomato. The pepper image literally indicates pepper as is. Additionally, the onion, garlic, and mushroom similarly render the actual seasonings used in cuisine. The string bag merely depicts the container of the products along with the pasta as the actual product of the brand. He remarks that in this case, we have a signifier and a signified which are essentially the same. This is a message without a code. Despite the fact that the Pansini poster is full of symbols, there is still a sense of being there in the shot. Considering the literal message suffices, nature appears to make the scene shown naturally.
The precise nature of their operation, as well as the relationship between the different messages, the linguistic message, denoted image, and connoted image, were then explored and attempted to be untangled by Barthes. Noticeably, the order of the messages was modified a bit as Barthes deliberately inversed iconic messages, the cultural and the literal. It was mentioned earlier that the linguistic message is twofold. With regard to this appears to be two functions of linguistic message, the anchorage and relay. While the anchorage is the most frequent function commonly found in press photographs and advertisements, the relay, on the other hand, is less common. It can be seen particularly in cartoons and comic strips. For the linguistic message, we all know almost every image in every setting is accompanied with a linguistic message. The primary role of the linguistic message is to fix or discipline the potential plurality or multiplicity of meaning that an image generates. As mentioned earlier, the linguistic message in this case is that this advertisement is for an Italian food company. This is likely to serve one or two purposes. One is the anchorage, a concept coined by Roland Barthes to describe how words can be used to clarify the meaning of a photographic text, and the other pictures used in these ads and the photography. Here, text serve to ground or anchor the number of possible readings that a picture creates, as Barthes explains.
An anchorage, in other sense, steers a viewer to a specific favored interpretation of an open photographic text or an image. An anchorage also emerges when language is employed to focus on one of these meanings, or at the very least to steer the viewer through the complexity of various interpretations. Relay, on the other hand, is the reciprocal relationship involving text and image, or between one image and one another. In each contributes to the overall message in its own way. Relay was a word coined by Roland Barthes to characterize complementary text or image interactions, such as those found in cartoons, comic strips, and narrative films. As I previously stated, the linguistic message serves to anchor or steer the viewer away from the image's many possible meanings and toward the intended one. Also, the linguistic message can be distinguished from the other two iconic messages, but because the non-coded and coded messages share the same iconic substance, it's more hard to ascertain them apart. The reader receives a perceptual image and a cultural message in rapid succession. However, Barthes underlines the importance of distinguishing the two in order to comprehend the final link between the messages and the image as a whole, much as distinguishing the signifier and the signified in a verbal sign is crucial.
The denotative structure of the photograph grounds and purifies the connotative ones, that is, both linguistic and iconic. The characteristics of the literal message cannot be substantial, but only relational. Thus, the distinction between the literal or the denoted message and the symbolic or the connoted message is operational, according to Barthes. Moreover, premised on advertising, he stated that we never encounter a literal meaning in a pure state.
Barthes provides observations looking at the levels of the denoted image. First, the literal message exists as a message by eviction. The denoted image has special characteristics which are evictive and sufficient. This means that one imagines the literal message only by imagining what the image would be if all connotations were removed from it. Therefore, it is evicted because it is a message without a code. Thus, this evicted state corresponds to a plenitude of virtualities, that of the absence of meaning, full of meanings. For that reason, it is then sufficient since it has at least one meaning at the level of the identification of the scene presented. Second, from the aesthetic perspective, the denoted image can appear as a kind of Edenic state of the image. The image is objective and innocent. Additionally, the photograph according to Barthes, seems to exemplify such characteristics of the image because it appears to be a message without a code.
He further explained, there is no such thing as a literal or purely denoted image in advertising. Every image, particularly in advertisements, sends a connoted message. He emphasizes that we cannot encounter the literal image in a pure state, that is, connotation will always be present when we glance at the photograph, and we cannot see it as a pure or simple denotation. Observing this, Barthes remarks that one must talk about the denoted image not in terms of its substance, but in terms of how it relates to the other types of message.
Barthes tried to compare the photograph with the drawing in expectation that it can illuminate the relationship between signifiers and signifieds in photographs. The relationship between signifiers and signifieds of the drawing is one of transformation. Thus, the coded nature of drawing can be seen at 3 levels. Firstly, drawing always involves rules and conventions. We know that there are different styles of drawing, and that drawings will vary so much that we cannot say that there is a single essence to drawing. Thus, in the drawing, we know that connotative coding is always present. Secondly, drawing always makes a distinction between the significant and the insignificant. It does not capture everything that it tries to represent, but perhaps focuses on outlines, shadows, dominant elements, and etc. As a result, the denotation of the drawing is less pure than that of the photograph, because the drawing will always register a technical style. Lastly, there are always deep connections between the style of the drawing and the thing being drawn. To put this another way, because drawing is something that one learns through an apprenticeship by learning the rules, it always involves a fundamental continuity between its denotative work and its connotation. The two can never be separated. In Barthes' own words, the execution of a drawing itself constitutes a connotation. Concludingly, drawing relies on all sorts of convention and what Barthes calls rule-governed transpositions, which essentially constitute a code whereby signifieds can be represented as pen strokes. Oppositely, the photograph, at least at the level of the literal message, as a form of signification is not one of transformation, like the drawing, but of recording rather. In the photograph, Barthes mentioned a new space-time category, spatial immediacy and temporal anteriority, which refers to that signification of the image. This, for him, represents a completely different experience. This new space-time category is what gives the photograph that message without a code, Barthes concluded. Spatial immediacy refers to the duplication of the present moment, the here-now, a record of something that is in front of the camera at the moment of the capture of the image. The thing in the image is right here, right now, while temporal anteriority, on the other hand, tells that the photograph was taken in the past. It records something from a different place, there, and the time then, hence the there then. Here we can understand that the photograph fuses the here now appearance of the photograph and the there then of what the photograph records, resulting in the having been there consciousness. Hence, the photograph establishes not the consciousness of being here, but an awareness of having been there. So what is the purpose of advertisers in making advertisement images appear purely literal? Barthes argues that the role of the denoted image in the overall image structure or meaning is one of naturalizing the symbol message, supporting and contextualizing the connoted elements, making them innocent. In fact, the literal message disintellectualizes the iconic message, making it difficult to analyze as a form of signification. In effect, allowing the image to say, "Look, I'm just a picture of a tomato, nothing interesting going on here."
Every image can connote multiple meanings. Hence, the connoted image is not conformable since the meaning is not based on empirical knowledge. This now possess a difficult and challenging task to perform. In the Pansani advertisement image, Barthes suggested only 4 connotative presentations in which he proved that an image is not limited to his own worldview only. Rather, he claimed that reading variations clearly depends on the various kinds of knowledge that a reader invests in the interpretation of the image.
Connotations, according to Barthes, is not purely paradigmatic dimension, as the source characterization of the paradigmatic dimension as associative might suggest. While absent signifiers with which it is associated are clearly a key factor in generating connotations, so too are syntagmatic associations. The connotations of a signifier relate in part to the other signifiers with which it occurs with a particular text. However, referring to the connotations entirely in terms of paradigms and syntagms confines us to the language system, and yet, connotations is very much a question of how language is used. Referring to the signifier, this refers also as the connotators. Thus, the set of connotators means a rhetoric, which is appearing as a signifying aspect of the ideology. Therefore, rhetoric of the image is the classification of its connotators. The connotators here, to understand that in the total image they constitute discontinuous or better still, scattered traits.
In examining images, each indicator correlates to a set of attitudes, all of which are clearly lacking in this or that person. In one and the same lexicon, there is a diversity and coexistence of lexicons. In its most basic form, lexicon refers to a person's understanding of the many signs, systems in action in the image. Idiolect, on the other hand, refers to the totality of connotative knowledge, which implies that it is entirely founded on the psyche and the ego. The interaction of his or her lexicon with the signs included in the image constructs meaning, not just for the author, but also for the consumer. The idiolect, as defined by Roland Barthes, is a person's collection of lexicon. Another problem with evaluating connoted signifieds, such as graphics in advertisements, is that there is no appropriate specialized vocabulary for expressing or articulating them. For example, due to a lack of a better name, Barthes had to coin the term Italianicity. Words, according to Barthes, do not have any pure senses or meanings since their meanings are always found in context. As a result, depending on context, one and the same word might have somewhat different meanings. This, according to Barthes, is a major issue. To make connotation analysis simpler, Barthes advises that connotative signifieds be given some form of vocabulary. Barthes, like Saussure, thinks that the signifiers are distinct from one another. Barthes believes that there is a commonality of signifieds throughout many systems of signs such as language, image, and objects. This shared realm of connotative signifieds, which is the same throughout time and location independent of the signifiers utilized, is referred to by Barthes as ideology. The multiple signifiers of connotative meanings in a picture are referred to as connotators by Roland Barthes. The action of connotators is referred to by Barthes as a rhetoric. As a result, the image's rhetoric encompasses all visual characteristics that might be used as signifiers. The examination of connotators, according to Barthes, reveals the rhetorical figures utilized by the ancients and classics. He cites examples of rhetorical figures he detects in the Panzani ad, such as metonymy, a type of metabolas, and ascendanton, a type of ascendanton, which is an example of parataxis or figure of speech that employs syntactic structures. In addition, Barthes seeks to decipher Panzani ad Saussure's syntagm paradigm dichotomy. He refers to the syntagm as the disorder or arrangement of the ad's individual imagery. For him, this results in the image's denotative significance. The meaning of the commercials, on the other hand, is determined by the paradigm of the visuals.
Analyzing images necessitates a journey through semiology, a well-known discipline credited to linguist Ferdinand de Saussure and pursued by Roland Barthes. As a result, the article contains conceptual language created and popularized by Saussure. Barthes is able to derive certain rhetorical elements from ads using Saussure's semiological notion. In Rhetoric of the Image, Roland Barthes is attempting to study and comprehend the meanings that pictures convey, as well as the amount to which they contribute to the formation of an ideological viewpoint. All rhetoric is distinguished by the presence of at least two levels of language. The denotation is the sign or dictionary word's definition, and it sets up a chain reaction in the actual world. The connotation is the interpretive affiliation that emerges with the sign, and it varies depending on the culture and circumstance. All of this correlates with the Panzani advertising image.
In the same manner that it is vital to distinguish between the signifier and the signified in a linguistic sign, Barthes underlines the need of separating the two in order to comprehend the ultimate link between the messages and the picture as a whole. He also noted that the picture's connotations are iconic, with the link between an image of a tomato and a real tomato being analogical rather than arbitrary. Between an actual tomato and a tomato representation, there must be a one-to-one correspondence.
Ultimately, Barthes' analysis of the Panzani advertisement is to show that advertising conceal ideologies that are not easily apparent to spectators. He expounds in Rhetoric of the image that natural reality is not inherently enciphered, but rather its replication is a mental representation that codes it and imposes cultural significance on it. Visual media are mistakenly thought to depict reality, while in actuality, they are shaping and reconstructing it.